All right, let's go ahead and get started. Man, there's a lot of people here. Oh my goodness, it's a little scary. Oh my goodness. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a few things to talk about. Hello, Blaine, how's it going? I'm sorry, I apologize. So we have a lot of things to talk about. I'm glad you guys are here, and let's get through it. I hope you guys find today's talk interesting. As you could tell, it might get a little messy, but we'll get into this. So who was here last week? Who was here last week? All right, keep your hands up nice and high, and tell me what we learned about last week. Yes, anyone? Yes, sir. Get out. What did we learn about last week? Anyone? Anybody? Yes, yes. I remember you. Yeah, about the Ethiopian eunuch all the way to the back. Yes, sir. The farmer. The what? Farmer. The farmer? Oh, yeah, the farmer. Yes. We learned, like the farmer. All right, so, okay, yes, we did learn about the farmer. What else did we learn about? Yeah. Yes. Queen of Sheba. Yes, we did learn about that. Yes, is that a hand? Did I see a hand around here? Yes. The Oriental Orthodox Church and what it means. Yes, ma'am. Different councils, and these are the things that we talked about. Yes, sir. Last one. Kibra. Of course, you would remember that. And okay. Yes, sir. How we are black. Oh, yeah, we're going to be talking about that. So these are the main components of what we talked about last time, and I see that this is not working. I don't know why. That clicking noise. Okay, so we learned about all these things. Just to recap, we started off with the Queen of Sheba. Do you guys remember two bodies of knowledge that we talked about? Quickly. Two bodies of knowledge. I heard it somewhere. Traditional and non-traditional. By non-traditional, I mean the West, I mean the white folks. So one of the things that I keep saying over and over is you have to feel comfortable to talk about race when you talk about the Ethiopian church. One of the things that I keep repeating over and over is throughout the history books, the ingredient of race has been taken out from our history books. And to pretend like race has not played any role in the church history is denying ourselves in our reality. We know from history books that race played a major role in who we are and how outcomes happen. And in the Ethiopian church's history, this major component that we know altered the course of history has been taken out. So we've got to feel comfortable to talk about race. A lot of times, we got to get comfortable to talk about race. And one of the reasons why we must feel comfortable to talk about race is because we are the Ethiopian church. Ethiopia means what? Dark-skinned black people. We are the black church. And we must feel comfortable to recognize, as a black church, race is a major component of our identity. So, quickly to recap, we talked about the root of the traditional source of the Ethiopian church goes back all the way for biblical times, and is supported by a book we call Kibra Negest. And it talks about the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba went all the way to Solomon, had a child with him, came back with the child. What was the child's name? Ibn Melech, which later on, Ibn Melech, Minilik is the theory of how it came. The word Ibn Melech in Arabic means the son of a king. That's what Minilik means, according to some philosophers. So Ibn Melech or Minilik ends up going back to Jerusalem, talking to his dad and bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia. This is the traditional view of how the Ethiopian church the Ethiopian history begins. We talked about the difference of the Bible between Ethiopia and Cush. What were some things we said about that quickly? Ethiopia and Cush. Very good. Okay, so in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, the region surrounding, I would say, about Egypt to about Sudan or so was called Cush. And when that region was being written from Hebrew to Greek, that region became known as Ethiopia and what we call the Septuagint Bible, that is the Greek Bible. And that is where the Greek Ethiopia comes from. Ethio means burnt, Pis means circle or circle face, burnt face, meaning the black people. So it appears that at least for the Old Testament, when it was talking about black people, that's how they're using the word Ethiopia. We said a lot of things about that. I'm not going to get into it in detail. In the New Testament, we read that there was an Ethiopian eunuch, and we said a lot about what the word eunuch means and all this. And that's where we get our identity of how the church started. So the Old Testament talks about how far we date back to biblical times. But in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch talks about the emergence of the Ethiopian church, traditionally speaking. And then we talked about the different councils and how there were different denominations after that. I'm not going to get into it today. Instead, what I would like to talk about for a significant amount of time is where did the interest of the West kind of start coming towards Africa, specifically Ethiopia? Why were the West even interested on learning about Ethiopian history? Where did that come from? How did that interest come about? Remember, I said this is a key component to understanding our history, our relationship with the West, with Italy, and so on and so forth. And we're going to have a full day on this in future classes. But today, I just want to talk about where did the interest come from about Africa? How did it get here? And I think when we start to recognize the philosophy, the mindset that the West had towards Ethiopia, we begin to recognize, aha, this is why they did this. Does that make sense? So let's start from the beginning. For the Westerners, Ethiopia or Africa played this place in literature as the exotic land. And historians like Homer, Herodotus, would often refer to this place, Ethiopia, as those guys over there who are doing stuff. Why? Because it was far away. Remember, this is before the internet. This is before calling somebody up and traveling or whatever. So they just had these ideas about what Africa was. And most of the time, it was just an exotic land. It wasn't necessarily bad. It wasn't they were barbaric. It was just an exotic land. But the main idea of this relationship Africa with the West emerges from the Bible. Specifically from Matthew chapter 2, where we learn of 3 wise men who went to visit Christ. Actually, we're told about the wise men who went to visit Christ, and they originated from the East. Now, the term West and East is relative. It really doesn't mean much. But generally speaking, throughout history, we think of West like Europe, West America, West, so on and so forth. But the East is the Middle East, like Syria and stuff like that. And it includes Ethiopia and Africa as well. And there was this obsession in Europe about who are these wise men that went to visit Christ. By the way, the story of the wise men is pretty confusing because a lot of people think it's how many people? Even I said it. Who said 4? Someone is miscounting. How many wise men are there? Why do we think it's 3? Go look at it. Matthew chapter 2. What does it say? If you have your phone, you can look at it. Matthew chapter 2, verse 2. What does it say? Does it say 3 people? It says 3 gifts. It doesn't say 3 people. A lot of you are three gifts, 3 people. Actually, if you read the commentaries within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, it says there were numerous people who started out the journey. There's numerous, thousands. And these were not just the average Joe, but these were state leaders, like respectable people, like presidents, right? Chiefs. These were important folks, officials, that said, we've been told in the Old Testament that the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, will be born 2 years from now. We are told that if we start following the star, that bright star, it will lead us all the way to Jerusalem. So when people heard this, thousands and thousands of people started the journey, it says. But soon after they started the journey, these state officials, these leaders, got word that back in their land, there were wars taking place. There were fights and arguments taking place, and they needed to come back to tend to the people. So they left the journey they started to take care of the people who were back home. And they went back. The rest continued. Soon afterwards, they're going, and they recognize they're running out of food and water. And then they say, look, I wish I could continue this journey. I really do want to find the King of Kings, but we have no more food. Let me go back. And a certain group of people went back. They kept continuing. And some of them said, how long is this journey? Another, how long have we been walking? And they got tired and they went back. Just like this, the numbers started dwindling down and down and down. And by the time they reached Jerusalem, the people who made it to the end were 3 people. How many people start the journey? But how many people finished? Now, all of us here, we've started a journey together. We start walking together. And all of us are convinced on the need to finding the King of Kings. All of us are convinced about the need of strengthening our spiritual life. No one argues with that. But as we start the journey, something comes up in our life that distracts us. We focus the only thing we're supposed to be fixated on, Christ. In a land far, far away where anything is possible, there was a guy whose main job was to be a lighthouse keeper. Now, these are the guys, in the ocean who has that lighthouse up so the boats don't crash into each other. He was an old man, but a very generous person. And how it worked is that lamp is turned on by supplying oil to it. And each month he would be given enough supply to last him throughout the month. But one month, someone came to him and said, look, I need some oil to keep my family warm. I need the oil to burn fire and take care of my family. Can you lend me some oil? This old man, being very generous, he said, that's a family, that's important. Yeah, take a little bit of oil. And then a few days later, somebody else came, a father, and he was like, look, I need to get some work done. I have no light in my house. Just give me a little bit of light so I could just work on my house it's completely dark. And the old man says, I got you. That sounds serious. Here's a little bit of oil. And then soon afterwards, another person came and said, I need oil because my truck is broken and I need the oil to, get the truck moving and all this stuff. And sure enough, he gave him oil. But he gave so much supply that by the end of the month, what happened? His supply of oil ran out. And the lighthouse suddenly shut off and became dark. As a result, the ship started wrecking and people started dying and there was big problems. So they came to investigate this man and they said, why didn't you do your job? Your only job is to look out for this light lamp. And the old man said, look. I care about my job. But this woman said she had to feed her family. And this guy said he needed it for his house. This person said this. And the people told him, we get that. And these are good reasons. But your only job, your main focus is to keep this light on, and you failed at doing that. Our main focus should be Christ. Our main focus. Everything else is secondary. we forget that we were created to worship God. God created us to worship. That is our purpose in this world. And most of us are focused on doing good things for the most part. We help out family, we have a job, we do other things for other people, and then when it comes to Sunday, I can't. I'm busy. When it comes to service, like I can't. Like I gotta help out my neighbor, I gotta help out my friend, I gotta help out my mom. That's fine. But you can't forget the only thing you were created to do, which is worship God. If you really are busy, and I've said this before, that your whole life won't allow you to worship God as often as you need to. If you find yourself missing Sunday services, missing Sunday church services, missing classes, time and time again because of your life structure, it's time to reevaluate your life. What kind of changes do you need to make? Do you need to quit your job? Do you need to move? Do you need to make new friends? Do you need to set boundaries? Because you can't neglect the only thing you are created to do, that is worshiping God. Everything else comes second. And when it came to the wise men, this is what they recognized. Everything comes second. The three wise men who arrived at the footstool of Christ. Now, their story about these wise men from the East was sensational in Europe. And over a period of time, their stories started to pick up, and sensational tales were being written about this Eastern land and how exotic it is and how awesome it was. Now, the East, as I said, was the Middle East and Africa and stuff like that. And these Europeans, they didn't have any idea where that was, what it was like. All they knew were the stories that were emerging. Are you guys with me? Yes? At the same time, we see that the kingdom of Aksum was rising, especially in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. This is do you guys know Aksum? You guys heard of Aksum? Yes? This is the ancient empire of Ethiopia. It was a huge empire, and I've talked about this in multiple places, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's important to tell you that this was a major empire. It was so big that an old historian named Mani in the 2nd century said the 4 major empires of the world at the time were Rome, China, Persia, and Aksum. That means Aksum was being compared to the empire of Rome at the time, this African nation. This major empire was compared to other major empires that existed at the time. And in fact, it was so advanced that archaeological discoveries led historians to think that this empire was so advanced that Africans couldn't do it themselves. Are you guys with me? It's so advanced. I mean, these technologies are so great, and they're kind of like what the Greeks were doing and what the Romans were doing. There is no way black people could have done this. So they started thinking, oh yeah, this must have been because the Arabs came into Africa, Ethiopia, and they helped them build these sophisticated materials. What hurts is not what they said. I don't care what Westerners say. What hurts me is that Ethiopians say the same thing today. You know how they say it? They say, we're not Africans. You heard that? We're Ethiopians. We're not Africans. We're not black. We're Ethiopians. Where do you think that mindset came from? This desire to separate yourself from Africa. Where do you think that the philosophy came from? Great Ethiopian historians have written in their book that the reason we had a great empire wasn't because of the black people's success, but because of the Arabs. Now, in my book, which you should buy later on, by the way, I go on to this analysis of showing why this is just not the case. It's not just it's offensive or whatever. It's just wrong. It's not true. One of the ways we know this is because of the discovery of pottery. what that showed is technologies that existed prior to Aksum and during Aksum and after Aksum have sustained prior to the advancement of Arabs into Ethiopia. We can't deny that Arabs came into Ethiopia. We can't deny that. They came in. But the technological advances existed prior to their coming, prior to Aksum and after Aksum. So we can't say this technology is because of Arabs if the technology existed before. Does that make sense? Now you might be looking at me like, why are you talking about race? Why is that a big deal? Like, let's talk about God. Why is that important? The reason why it's important is one of the fundamental teachings of Christianity is that we were created in the image of God. So when someone says you are a lower class, that's not just offensive, it goes against the teaching of Christianity. Whenever someone says you don't belong in this world because you're black or you're lower, you can't do what white folks do, that goes against what the Bible says. And that has major consequences in the way that we think, in the way that we operate. And unfortunately, we are believing this garbage. There was a study done, psychological studies, that a group of people, scientists, they wanted to do a study, so they went to a school, and they told the teachers, like, this group of students, let's call them, I don't know, Sammy, Timmy, and Jimmy, I don't know. So they were like Sammy, Jimmy, and Timmy. I forgot the names. Sorry. So they were like, okay, these kids, we've done our tests and we saw their scores or of whatever, and they're going to be successful in life. They're going to be successful in life. And they walked away. They told the teachers. They didn't tell the students, and the teachers didn't know they were a part of a study. They just told them, like, these three kids, Jimmy and the other ones, are going to be successful, and they walked away. And they came back a year later. Guess what they found out? Jimmy and the gang, they were scoring better than the other students in the classroom. Why is that? Because expectation of you're going to do better makes you be successful in life. Your self-worth, how you see yourself, dictates how you will behave in this world. If you tell yourself, I'm a failure, you will be a failure. If you tell yourself, I'll be successful, you'll be successful. There's many, many studies done on this. And Africans have been told over and over, you will not be successful because you're black. That translates into, why should I try? Think about what we say about Ethiopians. All we know how to do is fight. All we know how to do is divide. All we know how to do is separate. So you look into the world, what do we see? Churches divided, churches separated, churches, all this stuff. Why? We actually believe it. We really believe it. If you take time and evaluate yourself, we really believe Africans cannot be successful. Oh, you know us Africans. Oh, you know us. You know that translates into family life. Maybe not in the Ethiopian family, but in African American family, they're destined to fail, right? You tell black people cheat, black people can't do this, and then when it comes to family, they're like, well, that's what black people do. When it comes to spiritual life, we're told that Christianity is a white man's religion. So you're like, well, this is not in it for me. And that desire to be one with God is not there. We have got to challenge this perspective and recognize God has created us in His image. We are equal. We're not better, but we're not worse than any other race. And it starts with the way we think of ourselves. If you think lowly of yourself, you will be low in this world. We are the black church, and we should take honor in that, not hiding it, not saying, what about the rest of the, it doesn't matter. Let's not talk about our background. Let's not talk about our history. No, we've got to take time to take pride in who we are. Not because we're better, but because we take pride on who we are. That is who we are. But the only reason, or the other reason we know of the existence of this empire and this greatness is these great monuments that were erected in Ethiopia. If you guys Google Aksum, you guys will see that monument that's erected. And back in the day, what they would do is they take these monuments and they would write, and it is called inscriptions, about the different things they did in it. And one of them was the Monumentum Adelphinium. This is like really elaborate. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was made out of important rocks. I forget the material. And there were inscriptions in there of all the different territories that Aksum had managed to take control of. Guess what's not in there? Mentions of Tigray, Amhara, Oromo. It's not in there. These concepts of our forefathers, they didn't have it. They didn't think like that. A lot of the ideas that we're fighting about today, talking about history and stuff like that, it didn't exist back then. This is a social construct that we've created in order to divide people. The faster we wake up, the better we can help the country. Another amazing fact is because of how dominant Aksum was, it managed to influence the cultures around it, including shaping up a section of the Quran. If you guys read the Quran, there's a section that reads, Qala al-Hawariyuna nahnu ans'aru Allahi, which translates into, the disciples said, we are helpers of Allah, God. What I'm interested in is the word al-Hawariyuna, which linguists have troubled themselves over trying to find out where that word came from. And guess what? It's not Arabic. It's not an Arabic word. They said, so where did it come from? And they started searching all across the languages, and they found out the Ge'ez word that says, you should know this. You should know this. There's a Ge'ez word that means, how are you now? What does it sound like? Hawariyat, no? Hawariyat. That is a Ge'ez word. It's not an Arabic word, but we find it in the Quran. This, along with over 70 words in the Quran, are Ge'ez words that were adopted into the Arabic language. What this shows you is the language is so dominant, it started influencing the Middle East and the people talking there and their culture. It's kind of like in Ethiopia, people are talking about, like normally, I did this, right? So they incorporate English words here and there. The people were doing that with the Ge'ez languages. This is the type of empire that existed at the time. It's important to recognize your history. Not so we boast about it, but to recognize we weren't lower than anybody else. Let's get that clear. Questions at the end. I got you. Now, in one way, the story of the East was going on here, and Europeans were like, wow, the East is amazing, and I wonder where the wise men came from. At the same time, we have the empire of Aksum making kind of its imprint on the world around it. And then in the turn of the first millennium, we have the Crusades. A very ugly reality that took place in our history. What are the Crusades for people who don't know? Quick overview. Yes? Was a war waged to get control of the Holy Land by Europeans? Yeah, so when Islam was growing, it started taking territories of previously owned by Christians. So they went into areas where it was dominated by Christians, and they started taking control of the land. And the Christians were like, what are these people doing? And this was worsened when the Muslims took control of Jerusalem, the Holy Land of Christians. And they said, we can't let this happen. We can't let this happen. And then the people, the leaders of the Catholic Church, convinced the people that this was an existential war. If they didn't fight this war, Christianity would be destroyed. And they were fighting in the name of God, and that they should go to war. As a result, thousands of people were killed. The reason why we study history is so we could understand how humans behave overall, how leaders behave overall. When leaders want to convince you to join their cause, first they will ask you, hey, can you join this cause? If you don't join, they'll tell you, God wants you to join this cause. Do it in the name of God. It breaks my heart. The same thing is happening in our land right now. How many people have been divided over ethnic feuds, believing they're fighting a fight in the name of God? Not recognizing this is not our fight. It's the fight of the politicians. It's their fight. It's their war. But as a result, thousands have died. Thousands are dying, and thousands will die. But we have not woken up yet. We haven't recognized that we are listening to the words of politicians. We believe the lies that we're told. We are fighting with our enemies, thinking that we really are fighting a war in the name of God. If only people recognized how much this is breaking our country. Now, when the Crusades were happening, as you can imagine, this was, I think, like 200 years or something like that. It wasn't like a one battle, like where they went, they fought, and they came back. This was an ongoing thing for almost 200 years. As you can imagine, there were a lot of resources that were required to keep the war going. So what they would do is they would go to the Pope and they would say, hey, we need more resources, so please give us the resources, and the Pope will give them more resources or not. And one of these occurrences, there was a certain Bishop Hugh of Jabala who went up to the priest or to the Pope, and he said, hey, listen, we have a battle coming up, and we need your help. We need you to give us more resources. And he was like, tell me more. Why do you need more resources? He was like, this is what happened. There's a king. His name is Prester John. By the way, the word Prester is from the German Priester, which means priest. So Prester John, who is on his way to come help us. By the way, this priest, I promise there's a reason why I'm going through this madness. There's a reason, just stay with me here. So he's like, this Prester John is a descendant of the three wise men. The three wise men, the same ones we've been talking about for the past several centuries? Like that same three wise men. Back in the day, if you ever said anything and you're like, I'm a descendant of like biblical characters, that's it. You get whatever you want because you're a descendant of the biblical characters. This was a huge deal. He's like, you mean a descendant of the three wise men is here? Three wise men is coming from the east. Finally, we get to meet someone from the east. So where is he? He's like, well, the thing is, he was on his way to help us out, but he got stuck by the river and stuff like that, so he's not coming here anymore. There was one slight problem with the account of this bishop. Namely, there was no Prester John. He made him up. There's no such thing, no Prester John, nothing. Now, historians are like, why would he do that? Where is that coming from? And historians think that he made it up so he could say no one else is coming to help us out. So he's telling the Pope, he's having conversations, give us more resources. If you don't come right now, no one is coming because this Prester John was the only one and he's not coming, so now you have to give us our resources. And it worked. He got his resources. But the story of Prester John from the East, I mean, come on, like, this is scandalous. So the Europeans, they're not going to let it go. And sure enough, they didn't. Tales of Prester John started popping up. A letter in the name of Prester John suddenly appeared, where it talks about the land of the milk and honeys, and this land being this perfect land, and the king is a priest and a king, God-fearing, worshiping Christians, at the same time powerful and strong and mighty. And people were like, wow, the land of Prester John. We've got to meet this place. A few years later, I should say a century or two later, in Ethiopia, we have a King Dawit, and I'm going to talk about this another time. And King Dawit in the 13th, 14th century says, I want to find the true cross of Christ. The story is long, we'll talk about it another time. But then he goes into expedition, he sends his people to find the true cross of Christ. And these Ethiopians, they go all across the world to find it. And one of the places they go to is Europe. So they go to Europe and they say, hey, we're here. And the Europeans are like, who are y'all? Like black folks, right? Like who are you? We? You know, like, so they're confused. So they're confused. They're like, who are you? Who are you? And they're like, we come from the east. And they're the east, they came from the east. And then they're like, the descendants of Prester John. And the Ethiopians, Mindino Milo. And then they're like, you descendants of Prester John? And then they go crazy. And by that time, they already have like books on books on books of Prester John. They're like, come here. And they put them in the middle, and then they start reading out of the holy books of Prester John. And they're like, Prester John did this, Prester John did this. And there's, whatnot. And then they're reading them all these things, and they're telling them all these things. And then they're like, salam. And then they give him gifts. They're like, we are Prester John. Prester John. And they take the gifts, and they go back home. After that point, the Europeans are convinced Ethiopia is the land of Prester John. And there are expeditions made to Ethiopia to learn about this great land and the descendants of the three wise men. By the way, to this day, there are some people who think Prester John is Zari Yaakov. That's not true. That is not true. That's not what happened. Prester John doesn't exist. I'm sorry, I'm sorry to break your hearts. He doesn't exist. But what did happen is it invited Europeans into Ethiopia, and they started writing historical books about how they visioned Ethiopia to be. And we'll see that had major consequences in our history. Because what happened is their books went back to Europe and started fueling this perception about Africa, perception about Ethiopia, and that's what existed afterwards. Does that make sense? This is a critical point. There's a reason why I'm spending this much time on it. Once you understand this background, then you start saying, aha, that's why. That's why these things happen. That's why this happened. And we begin to get a fuller vision of our history. So now that we have seen how Westerners were invited to Ethiopia, let's see what their perspective on the emergence of Christianity is. Remember, one of the things I'm going to try to do is I'm going to give you the traditional story, and I'm going to give you the Western perspective of what they think happened. So we talked about the emergence of Christianity from the Bible of the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, what do the Westerners think about it? Well, it's important to understand Western's philosophy. Western's philosophy about the world. And a lot of times when I talk about this, people are like, man, you're so mean to the white folks, and stuff like that. It's not me being mean. It's just me telling it like it is. It's not my fault. Don't get mad at me. And the reality is, Westerners throughout history, whenever they saw something that was good and that was working, they said, we did it, that was us. Like Westerners say, science, yeah, science, we are science, we did science, yeah, we are science, Like philosophy, yeah, philosophy, we think, we are thinkers, we are everything. History, yeah, history, we have history. Nobody else has history, we have history. And I'm not making these things up. The founder or the grandfather of philosophy, just Western philosophy, is considered to be George Hegel. And you guys could look him up. He's like one of the greatest founders of Western philosophy. In the 19th century, has said, and I quote, "What we properly understand by Africa is the unhistorical, underdeveloped spirit still involved in the conditions of mere nature, and which had to be presented here only as on the threshold of the world's history." It's saying history doesn't have, Africa doesn't have history. It doesn't have history. It's not that we can't say a lot about its history. It's that it doesn't have history. Think about that. It doesn't have history. It is based on these philosophies that we are standing on today. Whatever philosophy classes you've been taking, whatever humanity classes you've been taking, it's on these principles that you're standing on. Whatever epistemology you have, that is the worldview that you have in America, is founded on these principles. Whatever worldview you have from America, they're founded on these principles. Until we can start breaking these philosophies and ideas from our mind, we really can have freedom. And we won't see ourselves and our self-worth, I should say. Sometimes when I come across these readings, I often question, like, where is God? Where was God? How could he let this happen? Where people rob us of our history and tell us that we have no history. A land far, far away where anything is possible. A young boy in a supermarket along with his mom. And he was shopping and he was looking around. He saw like the aisle with the ice creams. He was like, oh, wow, ice cream. He said, oh, like, I don't know what to get. He was like, vanilla? No, I don't like white stuff, so chocolate. So then he was like, that kind of came out. So he was like, oh, chocolate. So he's looking at the chocolate and he's like, wow, this is amazing. And then when he was like trying to decide like what to get, like he looked up and his mom wasn't there. He was like, oh, where did mom go? And he's like, Mom. And he goes to the next aisle. And he tries to see if his mom is there. His mom's not there. He goes to the next aisle. He tries to see if his mom is there. His mom's not there. And eventually, he sees someone who works there. And he goes crying to the employee. He says, my mom has left me. Crying. And the employee says, what are you talking about? And my mom has left me. How do you know your mom has left you? Because she left. She's not here. She doesn't love me. She never loved me. I always knew it. She never loved me. Huh? As he's crying, suddenly he looks up and he sees his mom. His mom comes to hug him. He's a little resistant. He's like, why'd you leave? And she's like, what? What are you talking about? I didn't leave. He's like, you left. She was like, I didn't leave. As you were looking at what to get, I got the ice cream that you wanted and put it in the cart. And I said, let's go. I guess you didn't hear me. Because when I was going by, I turned back, you weren't there. So I went to the aisle where you were standing and you had left. So I started running up and down trying to find you, and here I found you. I didn't leave you. You didn't hear me. And oftentimes when things go wrong, it's so easy to blame God and say like, God, where were you? And where are you? And all these things. But God is always there. But we ask him to be our leader, to lead us. And he gives us the direction. And he tells us where to go. But oftentimes we don't hear him. And when we don't hear him, we accuse him of leaving us. But he comes back. Unfortunately, we're not waiting for him anymore. We have left. If only we could learn how to wait on God, how to listen to him, how much better this world would have been. When it comes to the West, as you could imagine, the traditional view of Ethiopia is not accepted. They don't think that Christianity started from the Bible. Instead, they think that Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia around the 4th century. And the reason why they think this is because of these discoveries of Aksumite coins. You can't really see from the image. But what happened is, in the 4th century, there was a king named Izana. And there were coins. They were doing trade at the time with different type of countries. And there were coins that were associated with this King Izana from the 4th century, that the first group of coins had shapes of the moon on them and other type of symbols. These shapes indicated that Ethiopia at the time were worshiping idols, because the moons and stuff like that, the god of the moons. So they said, okay. And then they found a second group of coins that no longer had the shapes of discs and the moon and stuff like that, but they had the inscription of words like Amla Kasamai wa Midr, the Lord in the heaven and the earth. So scholars said, aha, this Izana must have converted from idol worship, which had the moons, into something. But remember what I said, to the Westerners, it's difficult for them to believe that a black church could accept Christianity before the Westerners introduced it to themselves. That's why, by the way, in the 16th, 17th century, when the colonization was taking place, that's why they came in, to indoctrinize the people, to teach them Christian. We have the better system. We are Christians. We are Christians. We will teach you black people how to behave, how to act, what to believe. So when it came to Ethiopia, they had a trouble with that idea because they're already worshiping God. Historians couldn't believe that an African nation could accept Christianity on their own without the help and the aid of Europeans. So they wanted to push the date of Christianity as far back as possible. But these coins showed that at least by the 4th century, there was some sort of conversion. You have Amlak Samai wa Midr. But even then, scholars were resistant to accept. This is when Ethiopians accepted Christianity. And they said, Amlak Samai wa Midr is a general statement. God of heaven and earth. It never said Christianity. It just said God of heaven and earth. Anybody could be God in heaven and earth. We're not going to accept it. But all that changed when this inscription was found that reads, in part, I have faith in God and in the authority of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, who saved my kingdom for me, and I have faith in his Son, Jesus Christ. Now, there is no more doubt that by the 4th century, Ethiopians had accepted Christianity. Why? Because it has the name Jesus Christ on it. There is no more doubt. So by the 4th century, definitely, we know, at the time of King Izana, Ethiopians accepted Christianity. This is where the date comes from. Are you guys with me? Yes. Should I keep going, or are you guys tired? I have one more thing to raise, but it's a long thing. So the other way that they know about how Christianity came to Ethiopia is through writings of homily of Frumentius, Frumentius, Abba Salama, Kasate Ibrahim. All this is the same guy. And one of the things that Westerners struggled with is recognizing that Ethiopians have multiple names. You know this, we have Yekristanasem, Yebetsem, whatever. And it's not Yebetsem, but his name is Frumentius Frumentius, Abba Salama, Kasate Ibrahim. These are saints in our Ethiopian Orthodox Church. You guys should really do your homework and read about them more and more. But the point that I want to take is there's a history that we accept in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church about how he, a non-Ethiopian, I think he came from like present-day Lebanon, into Ethiopia. By the way, in the book, it talks about Bihera Aga Azi. I love that name. The land of the free. That was the name of the country. Bihera Aga Azi, the land of the free, referring to Ethiopia. So it says that Frumentius with his brother Odysseus, they come to Ethiopia because it's Aksum, this great land of like, you know, Prester John. Well, it was before Prester John, but, you know, this great exotic land. They wanted to see what it was like. They come with their uncle, and unfortunately, the Ethiopians come, they kill the uncle. They're like, foreigners, we don't play. And they get rid of him. But then they see Frumentius and his brother, and they're like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do with this Frumentius character and the kid? So they take him to the king at the Is that a hand? Oh, okay. So they go to they go and they give the kids to the palace, to the king. At the time, his name was, I believe, La Amera or something like that. But soon afterwards, the king dies. The king of Ethiopia. Are you guys with me? Then the queen is like, oh my goodness, I have a son. His name is Izana, the same Izana we talked about from the coins. He's like, okay, Izana is here, and he's a little kid, and can you help me like raise him? I need help. Frumentius and his brother, they're like, sure, we could do that. And they raise him. They don't only raise him, they teach him Christianity. They conduct Bible study, and they construct, prayer rooms for him. I'm going to come back to this in a second. And soon afterwards, Izana grows up, and Frumentius' brother, his brother, says, why do I need to be here anymore? Like, this guy's a grown man. Like, come on, like, let me go back. And then he goes back. Frumentius, though, he's like, we got something going on here. There are all these Christians, but there's one thing we're missing. Clergy, priests, bishops. And without the clergy, there's no way to really continue service. That's why we need priests and deacons and stuff like that in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So he says, I'm going to go to Egypt, and I'm going to talk to them about you guys receiving bishops. This is very, very, very important, because this is going to kind of set the track for the rest of the course and the history of Ethiopia. So he goes to Egypt, and he talks to a saint named Saint Athanasius. And he tells him, these Ethiopians, like, they're growing in number. I mean, they're, a good number of Christians. Y'all need to send them bishops. And then he says, you look like you could be a bishop. why don't you do it? And he's like, me? Like me? Yeah. So he becomes consecrated as a bishop. He goes back to Ethiopia, and then the rest is history. That's a good story, but when we start poking at it, there are a few things that I think we should question. First, this story is accepted in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But this is interesting. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this phrase I do want to read is when it says that they were doing Bible study, it says the following, and little by little, this is back when Frumentius was teaching Bible study to the king or the prince Izana. Little by little, they were teaching him, that is Izana, the faith of Christ, blessing be to him. And they built a house of prayer for him and gathered students while they were teaching them psalters and canticles. Why is that important? Well, this tells me that there must have been Christians there before this guy was here. Because where are the students coming from? And more importantly, you don't construct a prayer room for one person or two people. You construct a prayer room for a multitude of people who are there. Now, like imagine like you don't accept the Bible and whatever the Bible says, you're not going to take faith value. But you've got to recognize that during the Aksumite period, Aksum was trading with the rest of the world. And there was a port named Adulis. And in that place, many merchants from across the world came. Romans came. Indians came. From the Middle East, people came. Like from everywhere, people would come to exchange commerce. But we know throughout history, when people exchanged goods, they weren't just exchanging goods, they were exchanging ideas, philosophies, teachings. So since Christianity was a major topic, of course, the ideas of Christianity and Christ would have been introduced into Ethiopia way before his arrival. That means Christianity entered Ethiopia before this guy. This is just like a common sense history. Now I want you guys to take out your phones and Google, when did Christianity enter Ethiopia? When did Christianity enter Ethiopia? What is it? 4th century. That means our version of history is completely dismissed. Our version, our history, on our history, our perspective, our viewpoints, our story has been wiped out. Why? Even on our history, who has taken control? The Western's perspective. Now you might be looking at me like, why are you spending so much time on when Christianity came to Ethiopia? Let's move on. Why is it a big deal? This is why it's a big deal. I wish Nebu was here. So when... I apologize. That just came out. I don't know where that came from. I apologize. I'm going to be in trouble today. So the conclusion of the story of Frumentius ends like this. It's a bit long, but it is important to talk about this. Again, it's very, very important to talk about this. So it talks about Frumentius coming to Ethiopia, being consecrated as a bishop. He goes to Ethiopia, and Christianity is spread. At the end of all that, we have this concluding formula that we were given in the Ge'ez version. It translates, one man whose name was Rufinus, he's the historian, reported all the matters about our father Frumentius, having heard it all from another man named Odysseus. So like Odysseus told Frumentius, Frumentius told us the story of that the story that we have. This is our father Frumentius, the first bishop for the land. The first bishop for the land of Agazi, that is the other name of Ethiopia. While he was in the land of Greece, he was appointed for the land of Agazi, and here as well in the diptychs, that is the historical books of like names of important characters. We find it inscribed that he was the first. He was the first. He was the first. He was the first good yeast, the first good yeast. Before him, there was no good yeast. Before there was nothing in Ethiopia. So, sorry, I'm getting emotional. So he was the first one for however many years that Ethiopia had existed. He was the first one, first good yeast that came to the land of Agazi. The first one. The first one. Based on this formula, the precedence is set for why Ethiopians accept bishops from Egypt. Based on this, and we'll talk about this in the future, Ethiopians were convinced that they had to continue to get bishops from Egypt. And how did Ethiopians receive bishops from Egypt? They would give them money. A lot of things happen. Don't worry, we're really gonna talk about it. I want to introduce today that this concluding formula was used as the basis for why Ethiopians had to continue their relationship with Egypt, and we will see what kind of effects that had on the rest of the course. But if Ethiopians had accepted Christianity prior to Frumentius, then this doesn't apply, because we already had Christianity. He wasn't the first. We already had Christianity. You see? The date of when Christianity came to Ethiopia is a critical question. Because if it already existed before Frumentius, we can't say who's the first one, and therefore this is how it has to continue from that point on. So we have to revise these stories and think about them critically. That's all I got for today.